Hi everyone, it's William with the Grand Duke Dmitri YouTube series, and I'm inside today. It's a beautiful sunny day outside, but there's some work being done out front, so it's a little noisy. So I tried doing a video out there, but of course, as soon as I started, the noise got louder and louder. Anyway, today I am inside Dimitri's room. It's room 309 at Hotel Schatzau, formerly Sanatorium. It is distorted by my camera, but it's not a big room. But he was quite happy about it, with it, apparently, because he'll be talking about it in this letter, and we'll hear what he has to say. Anyway, at the moment, you can see the balcony doors behind me and how bright it is. All right, so we're continuing on to the next part of this long, the third part, I think, that we've done of this long letter of 39 September, 23rd September 1939. There's no 39th September. And the previous part of the letter, both previous parts of the letter, the theme in this letter that he's sending to his sister is very strongly death and hope. So the idea that his death could very possibly be imminent, and the hope that he will, as he puts it, be able to pull through. So kind of escalating between fear and almost a kind of elation. I think he actually uses the word ecstasy at some point. Anyway, he describes leaving Paris, the train journey, and this interesting news, to me at least it was before I read this letter, about him having apparently fairly recently been on the banks of the Red Sea and meeting with a man that he describes as a Hindu doctor or an Indian doctor who was able to calm his nerves quite a bit and help him deal with the fear that sometimes overcame him, particularly at night when he was alone in his room and when he parted from friends. He had 3 incidents: when he parted from his son, who went back to school; when he parted from his sister, who was herself leaving for the United States; and when he parted with the 2 men who went to the train platform to see him off. Anyway, okay, I'm going to do just a little short bit today because I don't like going 20 minutes. And I don't tend to get a lot of views when I go 20 minutes, but this is very, very interesting for 2 paragraphs. Very interesting, rich text. All right, at this point, Dmitri, it's a multi-day letter, so he lets his sister know that this part is being written or was written, what I meant to say is this part is describing what happened on the 1st of September. So he starts it out by writing 1st September. The weather was splendid, and oddly, the altitude didn't bother me at all, nor is it bothering me now. In the past, it did bother me. When I reached Davos, I went to the Hotel d'Angleterre. The news was already out about the Germans crossing the Polish border, and it was horribly upsetting because there could no longer be any doubt about war breaking out in Europe. The question was only when, and it was clearly a matter of hours. There could no longer be any doubt that we Europeans were entering a new era, the end of which would be as difficult to predict as back in July, old calendar, 1914, in Petrograd, exclamation point. He's the one who writes old calendar, by the way. The gathering at the Winter Palace and the patriotic ecstasy, there's ecstasy, that prevailed there put us on the road to Alapayevsk, a frightful end. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Doesn't sound like much, but look at how much there is to discuss. Begin with something minor. He talks about how the altitude isn't bothering him now, but did bother him in the past. And I would assume that that came from the time that he and Audrey spent in the winter in San Moritz, which is very close to Davos. Not sure if it's higher or lower, but yeah, it's in the Alps and very close to Davos. And he and Audrey went there because that was where jet set kind of people went. I don't think there was a lot of jet travel. Well, there was no jet travel. I'm sorry, I'm being stupid. There were no jets. But anyway, it was where the fashionable people gathered in Europe during the winter season was in San Moritz. Not so much in Davos. You know, Davos had its fashionable element, but it was not glamorous. It had it was more of a health resort. Anyway, I believe that's what he was referring to. He was so interested in bobsledding and even participated in some bobsledding. I don't know if he did actual competitions, but anyway, he was used to this part of Switzerland, Graubünden and San Moritz. Interesting that the altitude didn't bother him this time. All right. Going on from there, we Europeans is the next thing that stands out to me. We Europeans were entering, there could no longer be any doubt that we Europeans were entering a new era. So this will tie into a later letter that he sends to Maria when she's sort of telling him, seemingly from how he's responding, it seems that she was telling him that maybe he should be a little ashamed of himself for having not been so focused on Russia. You know, he'd been very politically active with young Russia and all of that. And then he says to her, I am now a patriot of Europe. And Grunwald would describe to her how Dmitri had sort of been neglecting his political activities within the emigration and was more involved with people like Lord Beaverbrook in Britain. And yeah, he told her quite explicitly, I am now a patriot of Europe. So here he is saying we Europeans. So that's a huge swing. I think, make of it what you will. And then this next paragraph, which is so tiny, it's just one sentence, is just fascinating. It's fascinating to think of him arriving in Davos on this day. And clearly by the time he reached Davos, the invasion had taken place. But you didn't have the declarations of war yet from France and from Britain. But everybody knew that was what was going to happen. Okay, so he compares this. He says it's going to be difficult to predict, as it was back in 1914. Very true, because what would follow is something that would be called the phony war. Going until I think May 1940, you would have this period where it seemed like nothing really was going to happen, But anyway, that's getting ahead of the game. Dmitri will be talking about the phony war specifically. But what's fascinating here is his comparison of it to the gathering at the Winter Palace and the patriotic ecstasy that prevailed there. And he's blaming those things specifically for the Russian Revolution, not only for the Russian Revolution, but for the slaughter of the Romanovs. So that really fascinates me. So the gathering at the Winter Palace, when war was declared, and the Tsar and the entire imperial family went out on the balcony of the Winter Palace, and the crowd gathered below were, I believe that's true, that they were in this state of patriotic ecstasy, and everyone was just carried away by it. I mean, Nicholas II was not pro-war at all, but he felt duty-bound because this other Slav state, Serbia, had been, Germany and Austria had declared war on Serbia. I'm letting myself get pulled into that anyway, it's just fascinating that Dmitri links that appearance on the balcony and the patriotic ecstasy of Russians, probably not the peasantry, but educated Russians, Russians in the capital, urban Russians, this patriotic ecstasy that swept over them. And then says that was what put us on the road to Alapayevsk. So that's interesting for two reasons, because as I said, he's linking those two things rather than, say, the revolutionary movement that had been ongoing in Russia for decades or anything like that. He's saying it's those two things. And he's also not saying that put us on the road to Yekaterinburg. He's saying that put us on the road to Alapayevsk. So Alapayevsk was where Dmitri's aunt, Grand Duchess Elizabeth, and his half-brother, Bodya, or Vladimir Paley, were killed. And Ioan Konstantinovich and I believe Sergei Mikhailovich, they were killed in a very gruesome way. Again, I'm not going to go down that path, but it really, these things all really fascinate me, as you already know. So I'm going to leave that for now. I was going to do a much bigger section, but I've already gone past the 10-minute mark, and I'm due at the Documentation Bibliothèque in town. So what will we have next time? We will have a description of his actual arrival, what that was like, how he got from the station to the hotel, and what the atmosphere was like, what the streets were like, given this extraordinary event that was occurring, and what kind of reception he got, and all kinds of fascinating things. So I hope you'll come back for that, and I'll see you then. Bye.